Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is March 18th, 2025. I want to start by saying happy belated St. Patrick's Day. I am half Polish, half Irish, so we were quite busy, and I didn't really have too much time to get too much content out there. So I hope everybody had a wonderful and safe St. Patrick's Day. I am genuinely concerned with the bubbling issue that will be placing Republicans and conservatives who fancy themselves Federalist constitutional Puritans in a very sticky situation in the near future. As many people are pointing out, there is a very real risk of watching this country go from a democratic, classically liberal republic into a fully fledged authoritarian regime. The problem is how very quickly it seems to be occurring and how some folks may not recognize it, whether from their own bias or just a need to raise false equivalencies in a defensive fashion. So if you dig news, history, or just humorous American hogwash, make sure to drop a little poop emoji in the comments section, because my detractors think I'm full of crap anyway, so what does it matter? Now, let's get at it. This week, a judge gave an order to the president, which was to stop the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members, and even turn planes back around in the sky, and Trump refused and used the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 as a means to justify this. There's a lot of problems for a number of reasons, but one is that this is usually a wartime measure, and we are not currently at war with anyone. Redefining the meaning of war to also cover judicial proceedings against gang members is a slippery slope that could lead to implementing a form of martial law. Another reason is that some of the hundreds of deported immigrants may not have actually been gang members. There's a high probability that low-level criminals or completely innocent civilians are being carted away to El Salvador to serve hard time. There is no judge who has yet to make these determinations, and that means their due process has been completely stripped. This is all around a really shitty and unethical thing to do and way to approach these things. So a federal judge has done what many have and intervened with a temporary restraining order, or what's called a TRO. The Trump administration officially ignored the verbal order by the judge and declared that since it was a verbal and not written order, there was questions to the veracity of it. Spoiler alert, this is legally donkey spit because a judge's order is a judge's order regardless. But in order to make sure that everything was done accordingly, the judge made a written declaration that also states that Trump must follow the TRO. And here's where we find ourselves at the precipice of a constitutional crisis. You see, it isn't Trump ignoring a federal judge that lends credence to the notion that we will have crossed the Rubicon into full authoritarianism. It's the response, or lack thereof, rather, by the legislature or the judiciary. If there's one thing that is certain, it's how many times Trump has tried to use his authority to break or bend constitutional law during the short period of his tenure. Regardless, his administration has opened a fire hydrant of unlawful orders and demands that's legitimately difficult to keep up with, assuming he won't pull an Andrew Jackson and just ignore the judiciary completely. Which, if you're curious, this isn't the first time that all of this has happened. In a case called Worcester v. Georgia in 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the state of Georgia had no authority over Cherokee lands. Andrew Jackson, who had been president at the time, ignored this ruling, which led to the creation of what is now called the Trail of Tears. Now, some actually say that Jackson once declared, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." But objectively, there's no hard evidence to support that he ever said those exact words. However, his actions that gave our nation's history one of its first of several black eyes demonstrated that whether spoken or not, his sentiment towards human rights was pretty abysmal, a trait that we see in the way Trump is treating and approaching immigration today. If Donald Trump continues to defy the federal judge's orders and the legislative bodies refuse to hold him accountable out of personal loyalties and the Supreme Court takes no action in punishing him for any kind of contempt charges, it will be at the time where nothing is done and he is not held accountable that the American experiment in self-governance and rule of law will officially be over. And the new dominion of dictatorial rule here in America will officially begin. Earlier, Trump called for the judge's impeachment, and even Supreme Court Justice John Roberts immediately made a statement that denounced Trump's declarations without naming Trump directly. There are people who are already trying to strawman this by saying that Democrats just don't want to kick out violent gang members. But keep in mind, these are also the people who are trying to lecture people on due process when Trump's ass was getting every form of it in the book and then some. Remember, this is a cult, and far too many people are easy to fool, but far too few are willing to accept when they're being fooled. People are already starting to justify in their own minds that the treatment faced by those deported are deserved. The dehumanizing is already beginning. The federal government is paying El Salvador to take these people in and place them in hard labor camps. Or he's sending them to Guantanamo, where they face similar living conditions. Those who praise this are already starting to excuse it. Simple civil infractions like overstaying a visa is being framed as some kind of criminal offense. Americans are openly watching their government take people and put them in camps, implementing the same measures that justified Japanese internment and defying the federal judiciary not seen since the Trail of Tears. Now, I know a lot of y'all are going to try and tell me Biden this or Obama that because affordable health care and student loan forgiveness is tyrannical. I get it, but hear me out. What are you going to do if everything you've been screeching and pissing your pants about actually comes to pass, but it's your team? Will you have the integrity to call it out, or be another person bitching about people who have no real power to justify ignoring the very real autocracy that's currently taking hold? When are you constitutional scholars going to get your heads out of your asses and do something about this? Do you all sincerely need to be directly placed in a camp yourself to determine that maybe some serious shit is actually going down? When can your fellow Americans actually start depending on you to stand up and do what's right? You all have the ball right now and you're dropping it. If you just needed someone to lay it out and say it to you, here it is. If you actually give a fuck about democracy, stop crying about Democrats and get your shit together. It's getting embarrassing. Car commercials for the richest man on earth? Are you kidding me? What happened to cheaper groceries and no wars? Democrats are already showing themselves to be feckless and weak, and Republicans are showing themselves to be role-playing their duties. All the while, an authoritarian is telling you that his unelected bureaucrat buddy is making everything better because he's getting rid of the unelected bureaucracy with no oversight or apparent limitations. It's time to get your head in the game, y'all. Seriously. It's not about politics any longer. It's about objective reality that y'all simply keep refusing to accept. I can only lead a horse to water. At some point, y'all will have to start doing the heavy lifting of acceptance so we can all try and stop this before it gets out of hand. Public sentiment will be the only driving force at this point. Anyways, if you enjoyed the content, consider liking and subscribing. We have a hell of an uphill struggle, and I need every single one of you in this fight. Y'all come back now. You hear?